what if the difference between a year of just agonizingly slow progress and a year of like explosive, life-altering growth comes down to a mathematical shift inside a single quarter second of time?
Yeah, which sounds crazy to even say out loud.
Right. It sounds completely insane. But what if you're currently sleeping through hundreds of these tiny pivot points every single day, simply because no one ever handed you the actual architectural blueprints to your own mind?
Exactly. Because we just aren't taught this stuff.
We really aren't. So today, we are opening those exact blueprints. Welcome back to the Deep Dive. We're looking at a stack of sources today that, frankly, they rethink the fundamental physics of human potential. This is part 2 of our META-MATICS double feature.
Yeah, and if you were with us for part 1, we established the raw materials, right? The base variables of human capability. But simply identifying your materials does not build a house.
No, it definitely doesn't.
I mean, you can stare at a pile of bricks and a stack of steel beams for a decade, and you will never spontaneously get a skyscraper. It just doesn't happen.
You're just staring at a very heavy pile of potential.
Exactly. So today, we step out of the theoretical. We are taking on the roles of architects. We're looking at the advanced META-MATICS manuscripts, which, by the way, are these incredibly dense, sort of pseudo-algebraic concept mapping texts. And we are cross-referencing them with the personal field notes of an individual known only as the Traveler.
Yeah, the Traveler. Which sounds very sci-fi. But these notes are deeply practical. They document a highly precise 11-step operational flow of human transformation.
And we need to be incredibly clear about our mission for you today. This is not, it's not a motivational exercise.
Right. We're not going to tell you to just believe in yourself.
Or hustle harder, none of that. We are conducting a structural analysis of how you operate. We're going to show you how to engineer your own evolution, literally quarter second by quarter second. We're going to examine the precise productive tension between opposing forces in your life, and we're going to unlock the actual mathematics of exponential multiplication.
Which is where it gets really exciting.
Yeah.
Because we are inviting you to step into the metamind, the control room of your own internal operating system. You are no longer just the user clicking buttons on the screen, hoping for a reward, You are the administrator rewriting the core code.
I love that framing. So let's open the blueprints to Chapter G.
Let's do it. Chapter G.
So Chapter G marks step 2 of the Traveler's 11-step flow. And it introduces a foundational concept called the duality. But to effectively utilize this concept, we first have to, totally dismantle a very pervasive, deeply ingrained cultural misunderstanding.
Yeah, we have a lot of baggage around that word.
We really do. When people hear the word duality, or, if they picture the classic yin-yang symbol, the immediate association is usually something quite passive.
The default association is definitely a static balance. It's the 50-50 split.
Exactly.
Good and bad, light and dark, work and life. It's basically the entire modern corporate obsession with work-life balance. This idea that you have a scale and you have to perfectly equalize the stones on both sides so the beam stays completely flat and nothing tips over.
Right, and that static equilibrium is exactly what the META-MATICS manuscripts argue against. A flat scale is a dead system. The text is very emphatic about this viewing duality as a neutralizing of forces is a fundamental error in architecture.
Oh, that's a great way to put it, an error in architecture.
Yeah, because if you look closely at the ancient yin-yang symbol,
Yep.
The boundary between the light and the dark is not a rigid straight line down the middle.
Right, it's an S-curve.
Exactly. It's heavily curved, it's alive, it is in motion. The black contains a dot of white, the white contains a dot of black. Duality is not about achieving a stagnant, dead 50-50 balance. It's about dynamic, productive tension.
Okay, let's test that against how people actually live. Because shifting from oppositional thinking to complementary thinking sounds great in a philosophy class, but it usually plays out terribly in real-life practice.
It really does, because oppositional thinking frames these forces as enemies, right? It's totally binary.
Yeah, it's like, I need to put in massive effort versus I need to rest, or I need strict structure versus I need creative freedom. When you view these as enemies fighting for territory in your calendar, the result is usually this brutal ping-pong effect.
Oh, absolutely. The burnout cycle.
Yeah, you hustle and grind until your adrenal system completely fails and you burn out, and then you just collapse into total lethargy for 3 weeks. Or you enforce a rigid militaristic schedule until you inevitably rebel against it, resulting in complete chaos and zero structure.
And that ping-pong effect is the absolute hallmark of oppositional thinking. You're constantly swinging the pendulum from one extreme to the other, and usually you're feeling incredibly guilty in the transitional space between them.
Yeah, that guilt is the worst part.
It is. But complementary thinking, which the traveler outlines in Chapter G, operates on a both-hand paradigm. It recognizes that these forces are not enemies fighting for dominance. They are structural partners. They converse with each other. They fuel one another. You do not choose between them. You utilize the tension between them.
Okay, if I follow that logic, though, it sounds a bit like we're just dressing up the word compromise. You know, like watering down the intensity of both sides so they can peacefully coexist in the middle. Like, I won't work too hard, but I won't rest too much either.
I see why you'd think that, but not at all. Compromise implies a mutual concession. It means both sides lose a fraction of their power just to avoid conflict. Productive tension is about maximizing the absolute power of both forces simultaneously to hold up a larger structure.
Okay, let's visualize this mechanically, because that helps me. Think about the engineering of a massive suspension bridge, right? Like the Golden Gate.
Perfect analogy.
If you're the architect of that bridge, you don't compromise between the heavy steel cables pulling up and the massive gravitational force pulling down. You absolutely require the tension between them.
Right, you need them fighting each other.
Exactly. The bridge only holds the weight of thousands of cars because of the extreme tension between the compression forces pushing down and the tension forces pulling up. If you eliminate one of those forces, or if you just compromise and make the cables a little bit slack so they aren't fighting gravity so hard, the entire bridge immediately collapses into the water. The tension isn't a problem that needs to be solved or mitigated. The tension is the structural integrity itself.
That is the exact architectural mindset Chapter G demands. And it perfectly mirrors the traveler's daily practice described in the field note.
Oh, right, the training versus resting notes.
Yeah. The traveler documents this profound psychological shift. They moved away from that guilt-ridden oppositional thought process of, should I train intensely today or should I just rest? Because that is a broken framework.
It's the ping pong again.
Exactly. Instead, they shifted to the integration of I train and DI rest. The realization was that extreme activation creates the physiological and psychological need for deep integration, and that deep integration is exactly what prepares the system for the next extreme activation.
So one literally makes the other possible.
Yes. The deep, unapologetic rest makes the intense, highly focused training effective, and the intense training makes the deep rest physically necessary.
But to build that suspension bridge, to actually use that tension effectively without snapping the cables, you have to know what kind of materials you're working with.
Right. You can't build it all out of one thing.
Exactly. You cannot treat a woven steel cable the same way you treat poured concrete. They require entirely different engineering principles. And the blueprints in Chapter G decode this by categorizing the specific types of duality you are going to encounter in your own operating system.
And the text identifies 4 distinct types of duality. As an architect, diagnosing which one you are handling is step 1, because each type requires a drastically different structural tool.
Okay, let's walk through them. What's the first one?
The first category is process dualities. This domain is entirely about the doing. It's how you execute action in the world. The primary examples the text gives are planning versus acting, focus versus divergence, and strict discipline versus open flow.
The process is basically the mechanics of execution.
Yes.
Got it. What's the second category?
The second is content dualities. This shifts from the doing to the being. It's about who you are or the posture you inhabit in a given moment. Examples here are confidence versus humility, immense strength versus open vulnerability, or fierce independence versus deep connection.
Okay, so process is what I am doing. Content is who I am being.
Precisely. The third category is temporal dualities. This is strictly about timing, when and how fast things happen. The tension between urgency and patience, the tension between rapid speed and slow depth, the tension between forward momentum and pausing for reflection.
Timing. Makes sense. And the last one.
The fourth is scale dualities. This is about scope or perspective size, macro versus micro. Holding the massive 10-year vision versus executing the granular daily detail. Seeing the whole interconnected system versus focusing on a single isolated element.
Okay, so we have the materials. Process, content, temporal, and scale.
Ah.
But how do we actually handle them? Because you mentioned different tools for different materials. Let's start with the tool for process dualities, the doing.
Right, so you manage the tension between, say, planning and acting through a tool called conscious alternation. The neurological reality is that you cannot plan a strategy and execute a task at the exact same time with any degree of high efficiency.
No, your brain just fries.
Totally. They utilize completely different cognitive networks. So you must create explicit, rigid rhythms. The text provides a fantastic operational example. You dedicate Sunday evening entirely to planning mode. You look at the week, you allocate resources, you make the hard decisions. Then, from Monday morning to Saturday afternoon, you are entirely in executing mode. You do not question the plan. You do not stop on a Wednesday afternoon, stare at your laptop, and say, wait, is this the right overarching strategy? You just execute the steps you already decided on.
I see. So this conscious alternation entirely eliminates the massive cognitive drain of decision fatigue.
Exactly. You give both opposing forces their dedicated, uncompromised time.
That structural boundary is vital. Because if you lack that boundary, you sit at your desk on Tuesday trying to write a specific report, but part of your brain is simultaneously wondering if you should be focusing on a different client entirely, or if your career is on the right track.
Right. The existential dread creeps in.
Yeah. And you end up paralyzed. You aren't planning effectively, and you aren't executing effectively. You are just leaking cognitive energy.
You're bleeding energy because you're trying to simultaneously hold a process duality. Now, contrast that with how you must handle content dualities, the being. The tool here is entirely different. You manage these through simultaneous holding. You do not alternate these. You must embody both at the exact same time.
Okay, break that down for me, because doing two contradictory things at once usually feels impossible. How do I simultaneously hold confidence and humility?
Well, think about the alternative. If you try to manage confidence and humility with conscious alternation, which is the tool for process, what happens? You decide, I will be supremely confident on Monday, and I will be deeply humble on Tuesday.
Oh, wow. Yeah, that is functionally absurd.
It is.
That's just a recipe for absolute psychological whiplash. You walk into the office on Monday as this arrogant, unteachable narcissist who won't listen to anyone. Then on Tuesday, you walk in as a crippled, insecure mess who questions their own right to exist.
Exactly.
If you misdiagnose a content duality and treat it like a process duality, you literally end up alternating your personality. You destroy trust with everyone around you.
It causes a complete system failure. So to use simultaneous holding for confidence and humility, you have to embrace the paradox. You speak with absolute conviction about your ideas, backing them up with all your expertise. You're entirely confident in your effort and your preparation.
Right.
But in that exact same breath, you stay completely open to the possibility that new data could prove you wrong. You are confident in your capacity, but humble about your ultimate mastery of the universe. You embody the tension of both simultaneously.
I love that. Confident in capacity, humble in mastery. And what about the last two? Temporal and scale dualities, timing and scope.
These require a third tool, which the META-MATICS texts call contextual discernment. This is the architectural ability to read the room or read the reality of the situation, to determine what is actually mathematically required rather than just defaulting to your personal psychological preference.
Well, that is a massive trap, isn't it? Defaulting to our preferences.
It's huge.
Because we all have a baseline operating speed. Like, my default is absolutely urgency. If there's a problem, I want it solved yesterday.
Yeah.
I will force speed onto a situation whether it naturally wants to go fast or not.
And urgency is a very powerful force until you encounter a complex structural problem that mathematically requires patience and depth. If you just aggressively force urgency onto a delicate situation simply because it makes you feel more comfortable, you break the system.
You tear the cables on the bridge.
Exactly. Contextual discernment is the trained ability to pause your default reaction and ask, does this specific variable require speed to capture an opportunity, or does it require depth to avoid a catastrophic error? Does this moment require me to zoom out to the macro vision to see where the market is going, or do I need to zoom in to the micro details because a line of code is broken?
The manuscripts outline a few cultural traps here that are incredibly relevant to this. One is the trap of static balance we discussed earlier. The myth that every single day needs to be a perfect 50-50 split between work and rest, or focus and flow.
Right.
The text points out that biological and operational reality is dynamic. Some weeks are an 80-20 split because you are launching a massive project. If you artificially force a 50-50 split every day, you never go all in when the environmental conditions are perfect for a sprint, and you never fully, deeply rest when your system is totally depleted.
That's so true. Another severe trap the texts identify is the glorification of one side of a duality to the exclusion of the other. We see this culturally constantly. Hustle culture dictates that relentless striving, pain, and macrovision are everything, and that rest, micro-detail, or flow are for the weak.
Yeah, sleep is for the weak, that whole toxic mindset.
Right. But then we see the inevitable cultural backlash, what some call toxic self-care, which argues that any kind of striving or discipline is inherently harmful and you should just retreat into total comfort. Both of these ideologies fail structurally because they attempt to eliminate a necessary load-bearing force from the bridge.
To just slack the cables.
Exactly. And finally, the text warns against premature synthesis. This is the arrogance of declaring victory too early. It's believing you have permanently solved the tension between work and rest. The duality is not a puzzle you solve once. It is an ongoing, lifelong architectural practice.
Okay, but if we assume the architect has learned to hold that tension, and they are using the right tools for the right dualities, the bridge is stable.
Yes.
But a stable bridge doesn't explain how some people seem to cross it at 1,000,000 miles an hour. Tension is just the foundation. It keeps you from collapsing. But what is the engine? How do we move from a stable system to an exponentially growing system?
Which means we are standing at the threshold of Chapter H.
Let's open Chapter H, because this is where the META-MATICS transition from profound philosophy into the hard, pseudo-algebraic mathematics of breakthrough. Chapter H introduces the core mechanism of the entire text, saturated synergization.
Let's clearly define the terms here. We just spent time establishing how opposing forces can create productive tension, which we can call synergy. Synergy is an additive process. Two elements combine to create a third, superior outcome.
1 + 1 = 3.
Exactly. That is excellent progress. It is how good companies operate and how healthy lives are built. But Chapter H is not interested in additive progress. Saturated synergization is multiplicative. It is the highly engineered state where every single variable in your entire operating system actively amplifies every other variable.
To understand this, we really have to look at the math formula provided in the text. It's A/B + C/D versus A/B times C/D.
Right.
Let's define these variables so this doesn't sound like a calculus fever dream for everyone listening. A represents the iterator. This is your content, your raw material, your innate talent, your internal drive, your curiosity.
Yeah, the internal stuff.
But A does not exist in a vacuum. It is heavily modified by B, the delineator. This is your context, your external environment, your daily schedule, your physical support system.
Exactly. So the expression A/B means your raw internal curiosity is being filtered or modified by the external support you have designed around yourself. If your internal curiosity is incredibly high, but your external support system is chaotic or non-existent, your potential is choked off.
Right.
The second part of the equation, C/D, represents a second set of paired variables. C is your time, the literal hours you have available. And D is engageability, how accessible and high quality your immediate opportunities actually are.
Okay, let's ground this with the concrete narrative. Let's look at the additive version first, A/B + C/D. Imagine a guy named Additive Adam.
Poor Adam.
Right. Adam works in supply chain logistics. He's smart. He works hard. Let's assign the exact numbers from the traveler's text to Adam's life. Adam's curiosity, which is A filtered by his support system B, results in a functional value of 5. He has decent ideas, and his team somewhat supports them.
Okay, so 5.
Meanwhile, Adam's available time C filtered by the engageability of his projects D results in a value of 4. He puts in solid hours on reasonably important tasks.
So in an additive operating system, which is how almost everyone functions, Adam's total output is simply the sum of these parts. 5 + 4 gives Adam a total output score of 9. This represents linear, reliable growth. Adam gets his 3% raise every year. He makes slow, steady progress. There is nothing inherently wrong with an additive system.
No, it's fine. It's safe. But then we look at multiplicative Mary. Mary also works in logistics, right next to Adam, but Mary operates using saturated synergization. She changes the operator in her life from addition to multiplication.
Right, the plus becomes a time.
Exactly. Her equation is A/B times C/D. She still has the exact same baseline values as Adam. Her curiosity support value is 5. Her time engageability value is 4. But because she has architected her variables to synergize, they do not just sit next to each other on a spreadsheet. They actively feed into one another. 5 times 4 = 20.
And we must explain how that multiplication happens in reality. Because Mary's curiosity, that 5 is actively engaged, she uncovers a slight inefficiency in the supply chain routing. Because she has curated her support system, she immediately gets the software tools she needs to test a fix.
Oh, I see.
Yeah, and this high-level problem-solving drastically increases the quality of her work. Because the work is now highly engaging, the time she spends on it is profoundly focused and productive.
It's a feedback loop.
Exactly. The focused time yields a massive success, which in turn fuels a higher level of curiosity for the next project. The variables are spinning like a flywheel, each one multiplying the force of the others. Adam outputs a 9. Mary outputs a 20.
That alone is a staggering difference. A jump from 9 to 20 totally explains why Mary gets promoted 3 times faster than Adam while working the exact same number of hours. But the META-MATICS text doesn't stop there. There is one final, incredibly elusive variable added to the end of Mary's equation.
There is. The saturation coefficient, represented in the manuscripts by the Greek letter phi. Phi represents the achievement of dual participation. When an architect successfully applies phi to the equation, the multiplicative total of 20 multiplies yet again. It scales exponentially. It becomes 40 or 80 or 160.
Wow.
This is the mathematical explanation for the phenomenon we occasionally witness, where an individual experiences an entire decade's worth of growth, skill acquisition, or paradigm-shifting insight in a single month. They are not suddenly working 120 hours a week instead of 40. They are not simply gritting their teeth and adding more effort. They have aligned their variables so they multiply, and then they have saturated the specific moments of execution with dual participation. It is the geometry of exponential compounding.
Okay, stop right there. I have to push back on this because this is where the theory threatens to detach from reality for me. I understand the math for multiplicative Mary. I understand how curiosity can make time more effective. But this phi variable, this dual participation, sounds mystical.
Mystical how?
Like, how does a human being actually feel a multiplication sign in their daily life? What does fear look like when I am sitting in traffic or typing an email or eating breakfast?
Well, the traveler anticipated exactly that skepticism, and to answer it, the field notes provide incredibly visceral, mundane example. They strip away the macro-career variables and focus on the micro-reality of a Thursday morning.
Okay.
The traveler writes about standing in their kitchen, performing the utterly routine ritual of making a cup of pour-over coffee, grinding the beans, boiling the water, something they had done 10,000 times before.
So what made this specific Thursday morning exponential?
The traveler didn't just think about being present. They weren't reciting affirmations or forcing some rigid mindfulness technique. They were simply entirely there. And the notes describe a profound sensory reorganization.
Sensory reorganization.
Yes. The traveler noticed, with crystalline precision, the exact fractional moment the water inside the kettle shifted from a simmer to a rolling boil. Not because they were intensely staring at the metal kettle, but because their entire sensory apparatus was online. They felt the subtle acoustic shift in the sound of the bubbles. They felt the change in the humidity of the air against their skin. They felt the exact quarter-second window where the reality of the kitchen shifted from fragmented, groggy morning noise into a unified, crystalline yes state.
A quarter-second window. I get that this is a nice, highly focused, poetic moment about coffee, but I still need you to bridge the gap for me. How does noticing my coffee boiling directly translate into exponential compounding life growth? How does a micro moment of focus multiply my macro engageability factor? Aren't those two completely different scales of existence?
That is the crucial question. The answer lies in the neurological mapping of the brain. The mechanism of human attention is scale invariant.
Meaning what?
Meaning, the neural pathways you use to process reality in a micro moment are the exact same pathways you use to process macro variables over a year. In that single quarter second with the coffee, the traveler achieved dual participation. They were fully in the physical action, hand reaching, pouring the water, smelling the roast. That is perceptive participation.
Right, the doing.
But simultaneously, they were actively aware of the moment from a meta level, noticing the incredible precision of their own body sensing, observing how much data their brain was processing beneath conscious thought. That is receptive participation. They were acting and observing at the exact same time.
So you're saying that mastering the ability to do both simultaneously in a low-stakes environment like making coffee is essentially a training protocol.
Exactly. When you achieve dual participation in the micro moment, you are actively rewiring your neurological network to handle immense complexity without defaulting to panic or tunnel vision. If you can train your brain to simultaneously act and observe during a quarter second of pouring coffee, you are building the exact cognitive infrastructure required to simultaneously execute a massive project, which is the acting, while observing the shifting market trends around you, which is the observing.
Man, that's powerful.
That is how the micro multiplies the macro. That is what a multiplication sign feels like in the nervous system.
Which brings us to the absolute core of the traveler's blueprint, the quarter second. The text defines the quarter second as the phenomenological atomic unit of lived experience. It calls it a delineative visage. Now, I've used phrases like phenomenological atomic unit or delineative visage at a dinner party. I am going to be eating alone. You need to translate this jargon. Break that down for me like I'm 5 years old.
Fair enough. Phenomenological simply refers to how we actually experience things from the inside, subjectively, rather than how a clock measures them objectively. An atomic unit means the smallest possible building block that cannot be divided any further. And a delineative visage is just a highly academic way of saying a single snapshot with clear borders.
Okay, let me use a visual analogy from the text to make this perfectly concrete. Most of us perceive human consciousness as a continuous, seamlessly flowing movie. We wake up, and the movie plays until we go to sleep. But structurally, a movie is not a continuous flow. It is composed of thousands of individual, discrete, static frames flashing by at 24 frames per second.
Right.
Most of us sleepwalk through the frames. We just let the movie play, we get swept up in the emotion of the scene, and we are only vaguely aware of the overarching plot. We are passive consumers of the film.
That is the perfect visualization. The architect, the individual operating with META-MATICS, learns to neurologically slow down the projector and step inside the single frame. They step inside the quarter second.
And inside that single frame, inside that tiny fraction of time, the text states there are two distinct forms of participation available to us, which we touched on with the coffee. Let's explore them deeply. First is perceptive participation. This is pure action, being fully in the moment, flowing. You are the experience. There is zero gap between you and the action you are performing.
Think of an athlete in the middle of a sprint, or a surgeon in the middle of a delicate incision. They are not philosophizing about the nature of running or cutting. They are entirely immersed in the perceptive execution. The second form is receptive participation. This is the meta layer. It is being aware of the moment, observing, learning, analyzing the data. You are mentally stepping outside the experience to evaluate it. Like thinking, I am noticing that my heart rate is elevated. I see that the person I am talking to is getting defensive.
So normally for 99% of population, we alternate between these two states. We act, and then later we reflect on the action. We get into a heated argument with a spouse. We yell, we get defensive. That is pure perceptive participation. We are swept away in the movie.
Yeah, totally captured by it.
Then 2 hours later, we are driving in our car, we calm down, and we realize, wow, I completely overreacted because I was stressed about work. That is receptive participation. We argue, then we reflect. We act, then we apologize. There is always a temporal gap between the doing and the observing.
And that gap, that delay, is exactly where the mathematical multiplication is lost. Saturated synergization achieving phi means eliminating the gap. It is achieving dual participation, doing both simultaneously within the exact same quarter-second frame. You're fully in the experience, feeling the genuine emotion of the conversation, and you are fully aware of the experience, observing the dynamic of the argument, noticing your own defensiveness as it arises, and adjusting your tone in real time before you yell.
Okay, I'm going to challenge this heavily. Because frankly, trying to intensely act and intensely observe at the exact same time sounds like a recipe for massive cognitive overload.
It does sound like that.
It sounds like trying to stare at your own feet while you're sprinting at top speed. You aren't going to achieve enlightenment. You're just going to trip and smash your face into the track. You can't be deep in a flow state if you are constantly analyzing your own flow state.
That is a highly logical assumption, but the META-MATICS texts counter it brilliantly with a concept called pre-cohesive curation. The text uses the example of a master musician. If an amateur piano player tries to watch their fingers, read the sheet music, and analyze the emotional resonance of the room all at the same time, yes, they will completely stumble. Their system crashes. They only have the cognitive bandwidth for perceptive participation, just desperately trying to hit the correct keys in the right order.
Right. They're maxed out just trying to survive the song.
But a master musician operates on a different mathematical plane. They have engaged in massive pre-cohesive curation. They have practiced the scales, the mechanics, and the muscle memory so deeply, they have curated their physical skills before they ever step on the stage that their fingers move automatically. Hitting the notes requires zero conscious bandwidth.
Oh, that makes sense.
Because that massive amount of bandwidth is freed up, the master can hear the music as they play it. They can actively read the energy of the audience. They can adjust the microdynamics of their touch. They can feel the emotional weight of the chord progression, all while executing the physical movements flawlessly. They are playing the piano, which is perceptive, and listening and adjusting, which is receptive, simultaneously. They don't trip over their feet because their feet know exactly what to do without being watched.
So the secret to dual participation doesn't come from forcing your brain to do two incredibly hard things at once in the moment. The dual participation is earned by preparing so thoroughly beforehand that the action becomes effortless, which frees up the cognitive RAM to run the observer program.
Exactly. The dual participation is the reward for the preparation. The text outlines 4 specific domains that the architect must curate before the quarter second arrives: embodiment, cognition, relational, and structural. If you fail to prepare these, you will never achieve phi.
Let's not just list those. I want to know the HOW. If I have a massive, high-stakes budget meeting at 10 a.m., how do I actually curate these 4 domains beforehand so I can achieve dual participation in the room?
Let's walk through it step by step. First is embodiment. This is your physical vessel. If you are exhausted, heavily caffeinated, but sleep-deprived and holding tension in your jaw, your body is screaming alarms to your brain.
You're just fighting your own body.
Exactly. All your bandwidth is used up just managing your physical discomfort. Curating embodiment means you slept, you hydrated, you take 3 deep diaphragmatic breaths before opening the boardroom door, and you intentionally relax your posture. You clear the physical static.
Yeah, physical static cleared. What about cognition?
Cognition is clearing the immediate mental biases and the lingering baggage from your morning. If you walk into the budget meeting still furiously thinking about an email you got an hour ago, your mental RAM is maxed out. Curating cognition means explicitly compartmentalizing. You tell yourself the email is locked away until 11:00 a.m. My sole cognitive focus is the financial data in this room. You wipe the mental slate clean.
Makes sense. Third is relational.
Relational curation is adjusting how you view the people in the room. If you walk in viewing the CFO as an enemy who wants to destroy your department, you are instantly trapped in oppositional perceptive defense.
Right, you're ready for a fight.
Yeah. Curating the relational domain means taking a moment before the meeting to acknowledge the humanity and the specific pressures of the CFO. You frame them as a structural partner, not an enemy. You prepare for complementary tension.
And finally, structural.
Structural curation is having your blueprints ready. It means you actually know the numbers. You have the agenda clear in your mind. You know exactly what your bottom line is. You aren't desperately searching through your notes while someone is asking you a question. If you have curated all 4 of these domains, embodiment, cognition, relational, and structural, before you sit down, when the CFO asks a highly aggressive question, you don't panic.
You're just ready.
You have the bandwidth to answer flawlessly, which is perceptive, while simultaneously noticing the specific tone of their voice and realizing that they are actually just stressed about a different division entirely, which is receptive. You achieve dual participation. You navigate the meeting perfectly.
That breakdown is incredible. It moves it from abstract philosophy to a literal pre-flight checklist. And let's connect this back to the mathematical equations, because this is where my mind was entirely blown by the manuscripts. If you prepare your domains and you manage to achieve this dual participation, this exponential multiplication in just 1 single quarter second, what happens when you start stringing those quarter seconds together?
That brings us to the final and perhaps most awe-inspiring blueprint in the Traveler Stack, the fractal bridge to mastery.
I love how the text maps this out. It takes that tiny microscopic unit, the quarter second, and it scales it up mathematically to show the macro impact on the human life. Let's really geek out on the raw numbers here. There are 240 quarter seconds in a single minute.
Correct.
Which means there are 3,600 quarter seconds in a short 15-minute work session. The text gives a highly specific, documented example of the traveler moving through a massive, paradigm-shifting stage transition in their life. They are moving from stage 6 of their development, which is categorized as inquiry asking deep questions, feeling lost, into stage 7, which is vision having total clarity and direction for their future.
A transition that usually takes people years or sometimes decades to achieve, if they ever achieve it at all.
Exactly. And the text calculates precisely that it took the traveler 31,200 saturated quarter seconds to achieve this life-altering vision.
31,200 saturated quarter seconds. Let's do the math on what that actually looks like in real time.
That equates to roughly 130 minutes of pure, unbroken dual participation. Spread across the 4 weeks the traveler documented, that is only about 32.5 minutes a week of saturated synergization.
I want everyone listening to pause and think about the profound relief embedded in that math. 32.5 minutes a week. Most people are operating under the delusion that transformation requires grinding for 80 hours a week, destroying your health and sacrificing your relationships.
It's just a totally toxic baseline we've accepted.
They think a breakthrough is a lightning bolt from the sky that strikes the lucky ones, or a grueling marathon of suffering. But the META-MATICS show us something entirely different. True transformation is simply the mathematical accumulation of highly saturated moments.
You do not need to completely overhaul your calendar, quit your job, and work 80 hours a week. You simply need to increase your saturation rate during the hours you are already sitting at your desk.
Precisely. Let's say you are sitting in a standard 1-hour strategy meeting. If your saturation rate is 10%, meaning you are only achieving dual participation, true focus, and observation for a total of 6 scattered minutes throughout that hour, your growth is linear. You are additive atom.
Right.
But if you run the pre-cohesive curation protocol before you walk in and you increase your saturation rate in that exact same meeting to 60%, your transformation compounds exponentially.
Yeah.
You are a multiplicative Mary. You extract 6 times the intellectual growth, 6 times the relational capital, and 6 times the strategic insight out of the exact same 60 minutes of chronological time.
This makes the idea of mastery so much more attainable. It is not about infinite endurance. It's about microdensity. And the text doesn't just leave us with the math. It provides a progression practice for you to actually start building this neurological muscle.
Yeah.
Because if you try to be saturated for a full hour tomorrow, you will fail and give up. The text says you start at scale 1.
Scale 1 is almost absurdly simple. Your goal is simply to catch 3/4 seconds a day. That is the entire assignment.
Just 3 individual frames of the movie, like that first sip of coffee in the morning, or taking a single intentional breath while your hand is on the doorknob before you walk into your house after work. You just hold perceptive action and receptive awareness for a fraction of a second. You feel the physical sensation of the doorknob, and you simultaneously observe your own mind transitioning from work mode to home mode.
It is about proving to your nervous system that it is possible. Once you can consistently catch those 3/4 seconds a day without fail, you graduate to scale 2. Scale 2 is sustaining 1 full, continuous minute of dual participation. You might choose to do this during the first minute of your morning workout or during the first 60 seconds of a conversation with your spouse. You are slowly stretching the capacity of the network. You are building the neurological muscle of dual participation. You are actively increasing your baseline saturation capacity.
This raises a really important practical question, though. How do you know if you're actually doing it right? Because I can imagine someone trying this, and they are just intensely staring at their coffee, sweating, thinking, am I dual participating? I'm observing myself. Am I saturated? How do we separate true phi from just overthinking it?
It's a critical distinction, and the traveler's notes are very clear on this. Dual participation is not forced, anxious self-surveillance. If you feel physical tension in your chest, if you are actively judging your performance, if your internal monologue is screaming, I need to be more present right now, that is not saturation.
It's just anxiety.
Exactly. That is just cognitive anxiety masquerading as mindfulness. True dual participation, true phi, feels deeply enlivening. It feels like a sudden rush of clarity and spaciousness. It is the exact difference between gripping a steering wheel so hard your knuckles turn white because you were terrified of crashing, versus the fluid, relaxed, highly responsive grip of a professional race car driver who feels every vibration of the road but is completely calm in the cockpit.
It brings us right back to the suspension bridge. The tension holds the massive structure up in the sky. The tension does not snap the cables.
Exactly. And this brings us to the ultimate realization of the architect. When you begin to operate your life using META-MATICS, when you truly internalize the mechanics of duality and saturated synergization, you realize a profound truth. You are not just designing a business strategy or a creative project or a weekly schedule. You are designing the literal fabric of your time and your own consciousness. You are taking the smallest, most raw material of reality, the quarter second, and you are engineering it for exponential growth.
Let's pull all of this together because we have covered a massive amount of architectural ground today. The core message of the META-MATICS texts is this. You are the architect. Your job is not to passively sit in the theater and watch the movie of your life play out on the screen. Your job is to engineer the frames. You do not weakly compromise between opposing forces in your life. You use Chapter G's concept of the duality to build incredibly strong, productive tension. You don't just add more exhausted effort to your limited time and hope for linear progress. You use Chapter H's equation of saturated synergization to multiply your variables. And you achieve that massive multiplication through the variable of phi joule participation, acting and observing simultaneously by mastering the smallest possible unit of reality, the quarter second.
And if we bring this profound theory directly down to the ground, to the reality of your life right this very minute, the beauty of this entire system is its immediate applicability. You do not need to quit your job, move to a monastery in the mountains, and overhaul your entire identity today. You just need to run the pre-cohesive curation protocol on your very next important task. Maybe it's a difficult conversation with your partner tonight. Maybe it's drafting a highly sensitive email this afternoon. Before you begin the task, stop and prepare your 4 domains. Rest your physical body, clear the static from your mind, adjust your relational view of the other person, and prepare your structural data. And then, once you are curated, step into the quarter second. Seek dual participation, even if you only hold it for the first 60 seconds.
Which brings us to our final thought. Earlier, we talked about how a life is not a continuous flow, but a series of discrete, flashing quarter seconds. We talked about how there are 3,600 of those quarter seconds in just a single 15-minute conversation. And the math proves that fully saturating just a handful of those moments can shift the entire trajectory of your career, your relationships, and your understanding of yourself. So it begs a slightly unsettling question. If all it takes is a fraction of a second of dual participation to alter your geometry from addition to multiplication, how many life-changing pivot points have you already slept through today? How many moments of exponential growth simply flashed by while you were on autopilot? And more importantly, would you take your headphones off in a few minutes? Who exactly will you choose to become in the very next frame?